with Orphan 8, I have my third novel coming out in a couple of weeks, and I'm working on a fourth novel, but Orphan 8 was the novel I wrote to learn how to write a novel. And many first drafts where I didn't even quite realize Mildred Solomon was the antagonist. I didn't know how to structure the book. And when I really settled into that conflict between Rachel and Mildred Solomon as kind of the core of the novel, things really fell into place. And so opening the novel with Rachel, she's an adult, she's going to work at the home for the aged Hebrews home, I think I called it, and realizing who her patient is, that her patient is the woman who was the experimental doctor when she was in the orphanage. And then for Rachel to not really remember that much. So as the reader, we're on the journey with her, as she has to go do research to even know what happened to her. And she has to remember things. So we get to go on that journey with her and realize it. A medical library in New York where I went to research about the actual woman who Mildred Solomon is based on. And so I actually set the scenes where Rachel is doing research at the place where I was doing the research. So it was really, really fun. I did some traveling with Orphan number 8, and I was really lucky. It was a Target. It was a pick for the Target book club and hit the New York Times bestseller list. And I was in an airport and I saw it at the airport bookstore. And I was so verklempt over it. I almost got run over by one of those carts that they drive around the airport because I couldn't pay attention to anything. It was amazing that when the first box of finished books got delivered to me, I was in tears. And I just got the box of finished books for Counting Lost Stars, my new novel that's coming out. And I was like, oh, wow, there's that box. How cool. But the first one, everything is brand new. So Orphan number 8, really, really special for me. With my latest novel, Counting Lost Stars, it has this dual timeline, 1940s World War II Netherlands and 1960 New York City. It's really my two parents. And it was a way to bring together my parents in one story. And I'm always really interested in the way history continues to influence the present. So I liked taking the World War II timeline and then bringing it forward to 1960 to show that this is still an influence. But it was the beginning inspiration was my parents. My father was born in Rotterdam in 1933. He lived through the Nazi Blitz on Rotterdam and the German occupation, and emigrated to the United States in his 20s. And they lived in a townhouse. So my Oma and Opa and my aunts and uncles, and my dad lived downstairs, and their upstairs neighbors were Jewish. And so they witnessed their neighbors being arrested and taken away, felt very helpless, did them a few favors, saved some artwork that a relative came back and reclaimed later. But my Oma and Opa, their priority was keeping their own family alive, which, I can't blame them. My family survived. That my dad's family's not Jewish. They were Calvinist. But this helplessness and terror at seeing this happen all around them, my dad carried that in him. And he emigrated to the United States, was working in the Empire State Building, and met my mom in 1960 in the Empire State Building. She was a secretary in his office, very Mad Men. She was younger than he was. And my mom was a Jewish girl from the Bronx. Her parents, grandparents, Russian Jewish immigrants, they came pretty early. So they were all native New Yorkers by that time. And these two very different people got together. And so it suggested to me a way of taking two very different storylines and trying to bring them together. In the historical fiction about World War II, there are some novels set in the Netherlands, but I haven't read much about that focused on Camp Westerbork, which was the transit camp. You hear about Drancy in France, which was transit camp. Camp Westerbork was the transit camp in the Netherlands where everybody went there, and then they were transported mostly to Auschwitz and Sobibor, but to other camps as well. And it was very unique and strange, and I wanted to write about that as well. I'll show you this book, IBM and the Holocaust by Edwin Black. This was the nonfiction book that really got me interested in the idea of punch card computers in the Holocaust. So it's nothing I like discovered or invented, but most people I talk to about it are not aware that the concentration camp system was run on computer punch cards. And we see this, like the massive crime of the Holocaust. It's so big that there are people who don't believe it, because it's like, how could that have happened so fast, so widespread, to such destruction? And part of the reason was that it was organized with computer punch cards, and every large concentration camp in the labor office had a Hollerith punch card machine that would sort it. Each prisoner had a card. And so that's how they would keep track of everybody, send them out to do slave labor. The camp would invoice the company for the slave labor, the cost of the slave labor. How do you run this thing? And that's how they did it. And for me, I was always really fascinated with the way technology influences how we see the world. I studied Heidegger a little bit in grad school, in translation, nothing groundbreaking, but those ideas about technology and efficiency and how it influences the way we see the world were really interesting to me. And so when I was reading about the punch card computers and thinking about the Holocaust, I really wanted that as the through line. And so the 1960s New York chapters bring the punch cards in, because this is the beginning of business computing. And IBM is, they have a laboratory on the campus at Columbia University. The women at Barnard College were just beginning to be able to take those classes. And so I wanted my 1960s character, Rita Klein, to be one of the pioneering women in computer coding in the 1960s, and using that knowledge to try to help the Holocaust survivor she meets, Jacob Nassi, search for his lost mother. I do have a big outline, and as I start writing, things shift a little bit. And then when you're doing a dual timeline, where one chapter ends and the next begins is something that I'm fine-tuning as it goes along, because the reader has the knowledge that the characters don't. And so if one chapter teaches the reader something that they have in mind, then when they read the next chapter, but those characters don't know it yet. So that I like a lot. I like the kind of architecture of that. But the end point of the novel, the kind of emotional resolution of the novel, is something I have in mind right from the beginning, and I'm always writing toward it. It shifts and changes, as you really build the characters. But the key scenes and that endpoint are something I'm always writing toward. So I knew I wanted to show the computer punch cards being used to perpetrate this horrendous evil crime. And also I wanted to show the computer punch cards being used to learn something that brought people together and helped them. Again, novels are not a dissertation. I don't have to have a thesis. I don't have to pick a side. I can explore all the angles and empathize in different ways with different characters. So there's a chapter in Counting Lost Stars where the relationship with Cornelia Vogel, so she's a young woman working at this, I call it the Ministry of Information. It's based on a real Dutch agency, but I wanted to give myself that bit of fictional distance from the history there so that I could imagine a little more. But she's working there as a punch card operator, living in the same situation my dad lived in, a townhouse where her upstairs neighbors are Jewish. She's living downstairs. She's learning that the work she does with the punch cards is aiding the effort to identify and persecute Holland's Jews. And yet her neighbor, Leah, she's fallen in love with. And how can she help? How can she resist? And the scene where she makes a really fateful choice, that scene needed to be rewritten a number of times until it landed. And my first ideas for it were really different than they turned out to be. That scene was the most difficult to pull off. So again, in terms of like outlining, I knew that there would be a scene where something happened that would enable Cornelia to try to take a very big risky step to save Leah. And I kind of knew what it would be, but how to pull that off and make it seem organic and believable, and that you can feel it and it doesn't feel imposed on by the writer. So I hope I pulled it off, but that scene required a lot. I worked on that a lot. My editor helped me, my agent helped me. I had a number of readers, and that scene was the most challenging.